We are all one. Every being is a part of a greater whole. Every being is a part of a system. Every being is a part of me. So whether you're an animal, non-human animal, plant, microorganism, or the unknown, we are all connected. You may be a part of a family, or an organization, or a society, but you are still connected to me. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the Systems Theory. In social work, I explain human behavior as the intersection of influences of multiple interrelated systems. Sound weird? Well, it's not that hard to understand. Try this example. Just the way your mom's apple pie recipe had a little bit of her mom's recipe and a little bit of your great-grandmother's recipe before it, that's how systems work. Every member adds a little bit of themselves to the mix of what you taste and recognize to be Mama's homemade apple pie. Before we get too hungry, let's move on. Being the systems theory hasn't always been easy. In the past 200 years or so, I have had many different versions of myself. Just to name a few, there's the ecological theory, which promotes interdependence and mutual influence, the bioeconomical perspective by Bronfenbrenner, globalization theory, which describes interconnections, and the fuzzy set theory that has to do with math. Many branches of thinking in society have staked their claim within me, from mathematics to physics and from biology to sociology. All are within my domain and range. In the 1960s, social workers began to really take note of me. When I was under the moniker of General Systems Theory, I was based mainly from the literature of Ludwig von Bertalanffy, who defined systems as sets of elements standing in interrelation. For Bertalanffy, any element is best understood by considering its relation with other elements. When applied to the social work practice, a family member can best be understood by considering their interaction with other family members. Von Bertalanffy proposed his two main systems: open systems and closed systems. An open system is in constant interaction with other systems. For example, this could range from your average nuclear or non-nuclear family to internet-based social networks. A closed system is isolated from other systems in its environment. An example of a closed system could be the Otomí people of San Nicolás Hidalgo, Mexico, which are geographically isolated from the larger city of Pachuca Hidalgo. If open and closed systems are a nice foundation to start thinking about me, then boundaries help form the walls within that make up my infrastructure. So, let's talk about boundaries. When you think of boundaries, perhaps thoughts of borders come to mind. How far can I go? Am I in the right place? Humans don't always like to be reminded of boundaries, but they are there, whether we like them or not. Boundaries make sense within a system because they help people recognize, or at the very least, place mark where they stand. Within these boundaries, people form groups, clusters, cliques, and institutions. I guess you could say that boundaries kind of make up the nuts and bolts of society. Boundaries border institutions like family and education. Peers, community, and work are nicely defined within the walls of boundaries within me. After the 60s and 70s, people began to think so much about crossing boundaries of reality, expression, and recreation that they crossed traditional boundaries of thinking. In the 80s, people may have thought they were breaking free from traditional oppressive boundaries, but they were further integrating things into my endless domain. Yes, the systems theory evolved into the 80s and became known as ecological theory. Ecological theory takes into consideration living organisms and their environment. The environment not only has an influence on the person, but the person also has an influence on the environment. So there is a give and take thing going on. Suppose you received some bad news and want to share it with someone, but because of some perceived empathy, you choose to keep it to yourself. Whether you decide to share or not, the feelings you have will be input to other systems around you. So the output may not be completely perceived, but the theory is that you will receive some sort of negative output. Like anything else, I have strengths and weaknesses. One of my strengths is that I am very good to understand human behavior. One of my other versions is called chaos theory. Within chaos theory, social workers input information into the client in hopes of getting a rapid result. One method is to have the client create a genogram or simple drawing representation of the family. By drawing out their associations with family members, patients are encouraged to flesh out and come to terms with the dysfunction they are experiencing. This takes people from the theoretical into the real-world application. To argue theory is one thing. That is not always beneficial because not everyone grasps concepts at the same speed. But to have a physical breakdown of theoretical concepts in form of a genogram or a drawing, well, that's where I am the most effective. Well, I hate to admit my weakness, but only to be fair, one of my weaknesses is that my older forms can be perceived to be out of date or irrelevant to today's push for diversity and non-homogeneity. I can be perceived to be solely concerned with functionality and not with progress. I think a consideration of the old in light of the new advents may help us all understand that we are all individuals that are a part of different systems that make up one big system.
Most people have faced times in their lives when they simply cannot carry out all the obligations of a status, and the tension between roles within one status is called role strain. And role strain causes an individual to be pulled in many directions by the many responsibilities of one single status. So an example would be a student. And let's say this student has to write 2 papers, finish 5 reading assignments for separate classes, give a speech, study for a midterm exam, and do 2 lab reports in 1 week. So they are being pulled in many different ways by this one status, the status of being a student. On the other hand, there's what's called role conflict, and this is talking about the conflict between the roles of 2 or more social statuses. So I want to be clear when I say between statuses, this is not an individual status like before. So let's take a look at this guy right here and look at a few different scenarios to understand role conflict. So this man has many different statuses. He's a student, he's a husband, he's a friend, he's a worker, and he's also a parent. And these different statuses can compete for his time. So let's say that he gets a call from one of his buddies and they're very excited for their monthly get-together. They usually go golfing once a month. And he just gets a reminder on his phone that says, hey, tomorrow's your anniversary. So his status as a husband should be more important than his status as a friend if he's smart in this case. So let's take a look at another scenario here. Let's say a week later that he has a paper to do for school, but he finds out that his son was injured and he may need to go to the hospital. So in this case, his status as a parent may take precedence over his status as a student because he's concerned for his child's health. So in a final example, let's say that he had a big meeting Monday, but his wife wanted him to clean the garage. So in this instance, his status as a husband and as a worker come into conflict. And if his job depends on his performance in the meeting, he will probably choose to focus more energy on his job and his presentation than in this case on being a husband and cleaning out the garage. So role strain is tension between the roles of one single status, like a student, and role conflict involves the conflict between roles of 2 or more statuses.
Children watched a filmed adult perform novel aggressive acts toward a inflated doll, and the physical aggression was accompanied by novel hostile remarks. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language. And here's a creative embellishment. A doll becomes a weapon of assault.